Welcome to Devon and Cornwall User Group. Today we have the great pleasure to welcome Jay from Microsoft to explain to us how we can use visual calculations to write DAX and make our report building much easier.
This is great. It's exciting always to be able to talk to our community. So thanks first of all for putting this together, Sue.
Oh,
I
you're
really
welcome.
appreciate that. And thanks all for joining as well. I'm sharing my screen, so I'm hopeful this will show up in a second. So today we're going to talk about visual calculations and DAX, which is a topic very near and dear to my heart. Before I get started, though, feel free to use the chat for any questions. I'll also have a specific point in the presentation where I'll take questions. Please try to stay muted until that point if you want to ask questions, or use them put them in the chat, and then I'll try to answer them as I go. Okay. So with that, let's dive in. So first of all, if I can actually make my clicker work, that would be great. Thank you. There we go. So you might actually know me from, well, we were chatting about it a little while ago, just before the session, but I'm Jay, or I'm officially called Jeroen, but I go by Jay for everybody who doesn't speak any Dutch. I see there's a couple of Dutch people over in the call, so I might actually hear my name being pronounced properly during this call sometime, which I'm looking forward to. But otherwise, feel free to just call me Jay. I'm a product manager over on the Power BI team. I mostly focus on DAX and related topics like that. So the programming language that everybody loves to hate. And if you ever want to reach out to me, here's my contact vectors, my email address. You can find me on social media. Feel free to just ping me and reach out. Happy to talk. So with that, let's dive into the topic for today. So today I want to talk about the programming language DAX, the core programming language of our product. And it is interesting to see that DAX is conceived, or people think that DAX is very hard. And it's a feedback that we've had for like 5 years now, that DAX is hard, is always in the top 3 and in one of our top blockers for adoption for Power BI. And that's a challenging situation for us. And it's really a testament to the rest of the quality of the rest of the product that we got this far with our core programming language being perceived as so hard. And to face the reality today, this is how most of us write DAX, right? You find something somewhere, maybe a blog, maybe a book, maybe a community, maybe some expert, maybe social media, whatever. You find some DAX, you copy it, you paste it, you press enter, you cross your fingers, and maybe you invoke some higher DD if you're inclined to do that. And that's how we all write DAX. That is how I write DAX. With some small variation, is I actually have another source that you don't have access to. That source is called Jeffrey Wang, who's the inventor of DAX. So when I get stuck, I actually call him and ask him to help me. We'll see an example of that in the slides. But this is the reality, right? And you probably read these things, right? You have read this guy, the classic, right? From Alberto and Marco. Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari, the classic, basically the definitive guide, as it says. You read this once, you read it twice, you read it 3 times, you still don't get it, I still don't get it. And I'm the DAX programming, like I own this language over on Microsoft, and I still don't get half of what's in here, right? So you read that, and then you also maybe read this, whoops, that way around, which is called Extreme DAX from 2 Dutch MVPs, proud Dutch product. Why I'm showing this and this is theoretical foundation. This is the more practical application of this theoretical foundation. So if you're looking for practical applications of DAX, this is a great book as well. It is just not very simple and not very easy. So, and that's a challenge that we have as a product. We need to do better, right? And to show you an example of what is not easy is if you ever try to do a running sum or running total in Power BI, and you don't know what to do, you might have started searching online, and very quickly you'll find this website. And this website lists 21 steps to doing a running total in Power BI. 21. Let that sink in. We're not talking about rocket science here. We're talking about simple addition. A running sum is just adding 2 numbers and keep going. You don't need subtraction, division, multiplication, just addition. It's very basic math. We're not talking rocket science. And the leading data visualization reporting tool in the on the planet requires 21 steps to do this? Seriously? And that's the reality. That is 20 steps too many. Way too many. So this is a problem for me. Is there any sound problems or no? Okay. I saw something in the chat. Okay, I'll just keep
Yeah,
going.
I think it's Henrique's.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So that's really the reality that we are today, right? Like, how come DAX is so hard? So let's face it, DAX is hard. And in fact, what makes DAX really hard is filter context. And filter context is this thing that is something that is almost ethereal. It doesn't exist. You don't really see it. We don't do a good job of showing that to you, but it's the context in which all of your DAX is being executed. So when you write your DAX, you're not actually defining what that thing does. You're only defining what it will do within a certain context. So if you wrote a very simple DAX statement that is sum of sales amount, very simple. Given the context, that might mean the sum of all sales for all products in all countries in all the years, or it might mean the sum of red products in Chicago in 2023. The same statement might mean completely different things based on the context, and we don't show you the context at all. And that's a big, big problem why DAX is so hard. And then your calculations, your measures, are scoped to the model. What I mean with that is they are defined in the data model of DAX. So if you think about Power BI as a pipeline from loading data into it to visualizing data at the end, we're not just loading data for fun, we're visualizing data. That's the end goal. If you think about that as a pipeline from start to end, right, then your model is all the way at the beginning. After the data has been loaded, you created the tables, you built relationships, that's where your model lives. Here, the data is unaggregated and all the tables still exist. Here's where you define your measures. That means your measures have to be defined in the context of the filter context in the model. So when the measure gets executed, that measure gets executed in the context of whatever filter is in the model at that point. Afterwards, the data gets aggregated, and then finally data gets visualized. That pipeline will come back in just a couple slides. And then typical business type calculations are very hard to do. You probably have been in situations where your manager or your boss or your client asked for something that they thought was simple, like a moving average or a versus previous or a running sum. And then you went back and like, yeah, in DAX, that is not that easy as you might think, right? And they were probably surprised. And the real problem down here is it's very hard to refer to what came before me. And that's the core problem in DAX. Since it's almost impossible to refer to what came before in the calculation, all of these calculations like a running sum, moving average, or versus previous become very hard to do. Now, of course, we have something called quick measures, but the DAX it generates in quick measures is just completely so horrible. It's really hard to understand still what's happening in there, let alone tweak it. And if what you wanted is not exactly what was generated, how do I change it? How do I test it? It's really almost impossible. The DAX that quick measure generates is just horrific. So then we started thinking about that about 3 years ago when I joined the team. I started thinking about like how does this, what can we do, right? And then we started thinking about what if instead of requiring you to define that calculation all the way in the beginning of the pipeline, instead of requiring you to do it there, after Power BI has been aggregated and we're showing that visual onto the screen, why don't we allow you to write a calculation later in the pipeline, just before we start writing the pixels for that bar chart or that line chart onto your screen? What if we allowed you to do it there? Would that make your life easier? And the answer to that is a resounding yes, because as the data is aggregated, as Power BI is preparing to paint that column chart onto your screen, the filter context gets applied. The data gets aggregated, the model gets abstracted away into a very simple table. That is what Power BI does for all the visuals from the model into the visual itself. So In that process, it aggregates and the data, it applies the filter context, it reduces the whole complex model to something that is very simple to understand, which is essentially one matrix. And that's what Power BI does to show that visual onto your screen. And that's then converted to a column chart or whatever. So what if we allowed you to then play with that matrix and do stuff with that? And then while we're at it, why wouldn't we make it easier to write the DAX? The DAX you would need doesn't have to be as complicated as you would need for that model because, well, simply you're only working with one matrix anymore. And then on top of that, what if we even reduce the amount of typing that you would need to do? Wouldn't that be great? Well, that's essentially what visual calculations are. Visual calculations, or visual calcs for short, they are exactly what I just described. Instead of requiring you to write DAX calculations over here in the model, we allow you to write calculations over here in the visual. You're still using DAX. It's not a new language. You're not learning new languages. Most of the functions that you used in the measure, you can still use in the visual. It's not a completely new language. It's just it works slightly differently because you are in a different context, pun intended. You can refer to any field that's on the visual, including other visual calcs. You cannot refer back to the model, and that's on purpose. It might sound as a limitation, but that's actually on purpose, because think about it. When the data is aggregated, the filter context has been applied, as I explained. The data is aggregated, the visual is about to be shown onto the screen. Think about that as a little box. The data is now inside of this box. We have gotten rid of everything else that's outside that is not relevant to this visual that I'm currently showing. The filter context has been applied. This is the box you're in, the data for the visual. And in here, you can add visual calculations. Great. The moment we allowed you to reach back out into the model, you would have to worry about all the complexity of that model again. All the filter context would come in back into the box, and you would lose all the benefits of actually being able to just work with eye patches on with just what is inside of the box. And then you can, since we now have DAX calculations that are inside of this little box that is tied to a visual, we can then do tricks with that because we can suddenly refer to the visual structure because we now have a DAX construct that is visual aware. Measures have no clue which visual they're going to be on. They might be on a map, they might be in a card, they might be on a line chart, column chart, they don't know. But these things are inside of a little box. They are actually aware of the type of visual they're on. So you can do stuff with that as well. And we'll show you that in a second. So now you might sit here and go like, what is he on about? Well, we are essentially adding a new calculation tool to our toolbox. You already had calculated columns, and I know some in the community want to get rid of those. That's not the topic for today. You already had measures. We're now simply adding another thing. So to contrast the three things, let's look at them a little bit more closely, right? So calculated columns are defined on a table. They essentially extend that table with a column that takes data from the table or from other tables to calculate its results. It gets executed row by row by row, top to bottom. They are very easy to understand because you can look at it and go like, oh yeah, I see there's a number over here times that number is the result in this cell. Great. I can see all of that. It's very visual. The downside of calculated columns, obviously, is they're pre-calculated. They're not dynamic, so you cannot do anything dynamic at that point. And also they bloat your model. So don't use calculated columns too often because it will just, all the results are pre-calculated. Your load time will increase, your model size will blow up. Don't do that too often. Instead, you use a measure. A measure is great because it calculates on the fly. It doesn't store its result. It is dynamic. It doesn't bloat your model. The downside of measures is it's defined in the model, so filter context is a problem. You're struggling with it because it's hard to understand what this measure will return, depending on the context. Now, with visual calculations, we're actually taking the best of both worlds. Think about visual calculations as the love child of calculated columns and measures, if you will. We have the not pre-calculated results of measures, right? So calculation on the fly, but then the simplicity of being able to see what is happening on a row by row execution context that is from calculated columns. So from calculated columns, we take the row by row. From measures, we take the on-the-fly calculation part and we put them together, and that's Visual Calcs. And there's a little bit more that Visual Calcs can do, which we'll show you in a second. So what are they? They are WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Point and click will be provided if you want. So if you don't want to type, you can just work with something that allows you to just indicate with the mouse what you want to do. You're just working with what's in this side of this little box that I just explained. And we'll have new tricks, new functions that I'll show you. Now, the next slide is the most important slide. So if you forget everything in this presentation, this is the one slide, the coming slide that I want you to remember. And that's the mental model of what makes this work. And the mental model is any visual in Power BI can be represented as a matrix. Any. Think about it. A card, a matrix. A line chart, a matrix. A column chart, a matrix. A map, a matrix. A tree map, a matrix. Pie charts, you don't use pie charts, but they can always be represented as a matrix. And that's the core. You already have seen this. If you know what Explore is, the Explore mode in Power BI, you will have seen this thinking that a visual can be represented as a matrix. And that same thinking is what underpins Visual Calcs. So essentially what we're doing with Visual Calcs, we're showing you the visual you're working on. We're also showing you what we call the visual matrix. These two things are tied together. So we'll show you the data that's in the visual, we'll show you that in the matrix. And then with Visual Calcs, you're essentially extending the visual matrix to work with the data that's on the visual. So if you look at the mock-up here over on the right, you see there's a column chart in here, right? If you look closely, there's one group, 3 items, so 3 groups, and then 2 series, right? So there's 3 groups of columns, and there's 2 columns per group, so there's 2 series as well. What does Power BI need to show this? Well, just 3 rows and 3 columns. One column for the group, 1 column for each series, so that's 3 columns, and then however many rows there are as the number of groups, which happens to be 3 as well. And that's the only thing that Power BI needs. There might be millions of data points under here to get to this aggregated level of detail. Doesn't matter. In fact, there are millions of individual sales records that I'm showing here. But in this case, we're not showing that. We're just showing aggregated data. And that's the business we're all in, right? We're not showing many millions of data points. We're aggregating data. So for this, we only need 3 rows and 3 columns. 1 for each year, that's the groups. And then 1 column for the sales amount and 1 column for total product cost. And that's how we fill out this matrix. And that's what we're showing you. You're showing you the visual, we're showing you the visual matrix. And then with Visual Calculations, you're working to extend that matrix. That's what you need to know about Visual Calcs. Cool, so let's do a quick demo and then I'll answer some of the questions that are in the chat. Okay, so let's just switch over. If I actually can find the right keyboard, that would be great. Okay, so here we go. I'm taking something called sales amount and total product cost, and I'm just creating a very simple visual here. There's no trickery, there's nothing in here. I'm not showing you mock-ups, I'm literally just working inside of the Power BI desktop product. You can do this today already. This is nothing special. There's nothing that I'm hiding from you. Okay, so I'm creating this visual, and I'm just going to sort it by sales amount. By year. So now we have a fiscal year sorted FY 2018, 2019, 2020 visual that shows sales amount and total product cost. So essentially the same visual as I just showed you in the mockup, but now not as a column chart, but as a bar chart. Doesn't matter. Okay, so once I have that, I can now use the Visual Calcs to extend this visual with calculations. So if I have the visual selected, a new button over here on the ribbon gets enabled, and that's the new calculation button. And if I click that, I will enter what we call the Visual Calculations edit mode. Let me just hide some of the paint so we have a little bit more room. There we go. So the Visual Calculations edit mode should feel familiar. I just showed you this mockup, right? I showed you that mockup in just a slide. It's now in the product. What we're seeing is the product, the visual on the top, and we're seeing the visual matrix at the bottom, right? So you see the visual over here, the visual matrix here at the bottom, you can see that these numbers match. Look over here, there's FY 2020, sales amount is 51,800,000 and something. You can look over here, you can see that that is exactly the same number, right? So the visual matrix just is a matrix representation of what's in the visual. If I change the visual type, the visual matrix still stays the same because it's just a matrix representation of whatever was in the visual. Now, I can now start extending this visual matrix with a column, and that's a calculation. And it's already asking me to do something here. It has already added a placeholder over here. So I'm essentially able to extend this. So I can now do some calculations. I can say something simple as profit. Whoops. Profit is sales amount minus total product cost. I won't press enter yet, but look at this. It's very simple. It's just taking the sales amount and subtracting the total product cost. I know this should have been a measure because this is such a core calculation. It should actually have been a measure, but for simplicity reasons, I'm just doing that as the first demo. So also notice there's no aggregation because this behaves as a calculated column. So it does row by row by row. This is one of the things that trips people up when they have to write measures. Why do I always have to apply an aggregate? Like sum of sales amount minus sum of total product cost. Why can I not I see sales amount, I see total product cost over here. Why can I not subtract those two numbers? Well, with Visual Calcs, you can, right? That is what this thing will do. And also notice it doesn't take the table names because there's no concept of a table in here. The only thing you work with is this little box that we're showing you, right? The stuff that's on the visual. So let's commit this thing. Will this work? Of course this will work. It's just a profit. Okay, let's do something more intelligent. Let's say I wanted a comparison between the current year profit and the previous year profit, and I want to subtract the two. Okay, very common scenario. So I want to take the profit, so I'm just referring to the thing that I just created, and then I need to get the profit for the previous year. The profit for the previous year. Any guesses to the name of the function that I will use to get the profit for the previous year? Maybe same period last year, or date add, or earlier. That's all way too complicated. It is just very simple. What do I want to do? I want to get the profit for the previous thing, which happens to be a year. So I'm just going to write previous. And the name of the function is literally just called previous. Look at this. It's almost English. Profit minus previous profit. It doesn't get more easy than this, right? You can walk up to this and understand what this does. Will this work? Of course it works. There you go. Now I have a profit difference. Okay, let's do something more intelligent. How about that running sum we talked about? I want to do a running sum. So running sum of profit. So any guesses to the function name of running sum? How would I do a running sum? Maybe sum x, maybe calculate, maybe window, maybe something. Yes, just literally called running sum. There we go. It is so easy. Who designed this? Oh, wait, I did. So running sum of profit is literally just running sum of profit. It doesn't get any easier than this. Will this work? Of course this will work. Look at that. Now we have a running sum of profit. It takes the running sum of the profit in the years. Okay, something else. Moving average, another one. Well, I can also use templates over here, and I haven't shown you yet. I already started typing. Templates, you don't have to use them, but it's just an easy way for you to discover what you can do. So running sum is, as an example, is built in versus previous is something that's built in. Percentage of parent, percentage of grand total, average of children versus next versus first versus last, and our moving average. Any guesses to the function that we would use for moving average? You should know how my brain works by now. It is just called moving average. Of course, it's just called moving average. So then we're going to call this moving average. We're going to say the moving average of profit. Then I have to specify a window size. Window size is the size of how many years do I want to take into account. So in this case, I'm going to take 2. So I'm going to calculate the moving average over 2 years, right? So FY 2018 will just be FY 2018. 2019 will be 2018 plus 2019. That's the average of that. And then for 2020, I'll get the average of 2019 and 2020. Will this work? Of course this works. Look at that. And this is so simple. I made a couple of calculations just using very basic, simple DAX statements. Now, this is all great, but I'm not a visualization guy, but I can see that this visual isn't great, right? Because everything that I did was reflected in the visual. So that's not ideal. And I see some people asking that in the questions already. And what can I do? Well, maybe I only wanted to show the versus previous, the profit, running sum, and the moving average. Everything else I didn't want to show in the visual. How would I go about that? Well, remember what I said. You can only refer to what's on the visual. So deleting stuff from this visual matrix is not the answer, because that would break that rule, right? If I deleted sales amount, well, then profit, since it only refers to what's on this visual matrix, can I delete this? No, because then sales amount doesn't exist anymore and profit will break, right? And I can actually show that if I rename this sales amount to, say, Sue's sales amount, then of course profit will just refer to Sue's sales amount now, right? So deleting sales amount is not an option. Deleting total product cost is not an option. Deleting profit is not an option, because the rest of my calculation, the versus previous, the running sum, the moving average, they all depend on that profit thing, right? So it's a house of cards. What can I do? Well, I can actually hide stuff. Look over here. There's a hide icon. That is probably familiar from the model view. You can hide things from the visual. Look what happened. The visual is getting updated. We're not showing that on the visual. The visual matrix is still here because it shows all the data that's on the visual. And then I can move things around. I can say, you know what? I wanted to show the versus previous profit, and I wanted the running sum and the moving average. I want them on tooltips. So now I'm updating the visual. And now if we go back out, you can look at this visual. And this visual didn't exist before. And it was created using 4 very basic, simple, almost English lines of DAX that before would take years and years of knowledge or multiple lines of codes or reading of this thing to be able to pull this one off, right? A running sum, a moving average, a versus previous, these are not simple in normal DAX. And this is just regular, straightforward, very simple one-line DAX statements, and you're done. That is Visual Calcs.
It's just brilliant. I remember the first time trying to do running sum and just trying to get your head around how to do it. And so anyway, a few quick questions for you.
Yes.
Is it good quick questions time?
This is absolutely questions time. Yes.
Yes, it's lots and lots of chat talking about how to learn DAX, etc. So first question from Christian was, Visual Calcs works the same on visuals using either measures or implicit measures, right? Question mark.
Correct. Yes.
Correct.
You can use either measures or implicit measures. Of course, the experts will tell you shouldn't be using implicit measures, right? Yep. But we didn't block you from doing that. I mean, yes, of course you should not be using implicit measures if you know what you're doing, but this is also a feature that's built to new users, so we don't want to have any artificial hurdles. So implicit measures are absolutely supported. In fact, in my demo, I was using implicit measures.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah. And it is, I have users that just want to drag and drop. They don't want to, it's just a very quick thing they want to look up. The financial account. So it's, I think for me personally, I think you build different levels of entry points depending upon who and what's using it.
Yes, I think so.
Henrik said, do you write Visual Calc using the column names without the table prefix? Because of course, best practice is if it's a column, then you have table name column. Measure, you just use the measure name. So there was a little bit of conversation about that, but
well, the answer is yes. You don't have to. In fact, there is no concept of a table here, right? You only have one table, so why would you have to write that table, right? In many ways, these expressions are like calculated columns. When you write a calculated column, you can refer to any column that's on the same table by just referring to that column name.
Yeah.
You don't
And
have to write the full table name. In fact, many of the best practices tell you not to see the difference between the calculated column and a measure expression, right? This is the same. There is only one table. So why refer to that table by name? In fact, you can't. It doesn't exist. We don't tell you the table name.
Yeah.
So you just write whatever you saw on the screen. That's what you write.
And we sort of commented then that you have the different icon for the fact that it's a visual calc, so you can quite clearly differentiate between a calculated column, measure, and a visual calc. And Christian said, can you hide the initial values in the visual and keep only the VC's result? If yes, can one change the visual type using the visual calc?
Well, you can hide stuff, right? That's what I've shown already. You can then change the visual type if you want to a different visual type, right? Depending on how you build your visual calcs, that might break your visual or not. It really depends, right? For example, this will work fine. But and this is a little bit advanced, but essentially under the covers we're using something called axes. We can talk about that in just a second. But if you switch to a visual that doesn't have an axis you refer to, then your visual would break because your visual calc is looking for an axis to work with. So if I switch this to a card, my visual calc will break because it is expecting at least an axis that goes top to bottom, and a card has no axis.
Yeah, makes sense. Dane, I hope I've pronounced it correctly. Can you somehow make these measures reusable?
So great question. They are first off, I'll turn on my pedantic mode for a second. They are not measures. And don't think about them as measures. This is the key to understanding visual calculations. I've been there 3 years ago. I thought about them as measures. Don't do that. It's the wrong thing to do. You will never understand them because these are not measures. In fact, they are way more comparable to calculated columns than to measures. So think about them as calculations. We picked that name on purpose. So think about them as calculations. I'll turn my pedantic mode off.
Okay.
So you cannot reuse them. As in, you cannot store them in the model right now. Because think about it. Storing them in the model to reuse across visuals would mean you worry about filter context again. And that's the whole thing we just got rid of with just putting you inside of the visual. So the only reuse today is copy paste, which arguably is not great. We should do better. But this is a preview that has only been there for like 2 months now. We will do better. We're figuring out what that story is. But right now, the only story is copy paste. And of course, that is not great as a reuse.
And if you follow Jay on LinkedIn, he puts out little forms asking for you. So if you're using this, I filled them in, but it's worth following because you generally are interested in what people in the community want. So, and to get feedback from when you're using it. So if you haven't connected with Jay now, then do so either on Twitter, which is always an interesting read when he's on Twitter because he's very honest, or on LinkedIn, and he posts different forms on there. Another question from Pavel: when is general release for GA for visual calculations?
I can't tell you.
Can't say.
I don't know yet. We have a lot to do. I wrote a 110-page functional specification for this feature. We're around page 40 by now. So we have more than half still to go. Implementation started more than 2 years ago. So, we're only just showing you what we've been working on for more than 2 years. So it will take a little bit from here. I don't think it will take another 2 years, honestly. But it also will depend on your feedback and your adoption, right? So try it, give us feedback, and let us know what you think, because that will make or break what this feature will do and what the future will look like for this feature.
Yeah. And Tim said, can you format the value? So if you want
not yet, no, that's absolutely a limitation. You cannot format this value yet. So any visual calc you have will just be stuck in that format. That is something that is on the list of documented limitations. There's many things that are on the list of documented limitations, but of course you would like, this profit thing to be formatted as properly as a currency, right?
Yeah.
Which it's not. Now, of course, you can use the format function, so you would be able to just add a format over here and
Yeah.
say format something,
Yeah.
right? But the downside is this changes that number into a text,
I
which is
see. Yeah.
okay
Yeah.
for the visual matrix, but for showing that in the visual, that is not great because that visual might do different things because you now suddenly gave it a text instead of a number. So putting that number now on an
Yes.
axis
Yeah.
is then going to be impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's
the answer
sorting and
is really
everything.
no, you can't.
Yeah. Another one from Peter. Is it possible for users to also discover how the standard DAX used in Visual Calcs is written so they can learn from it? Similar to Power Queries, column from example. Yeah, I guess that's part of it is learning, isn't it? How to do it.
Right. So we're working on that. So I promise you point and click, and I've done a lot of typing, right? So point and click is kind of our answer to Peter's question right there. It's like if I was able to work with this visual matrix over here at the bottom and just point to what I wanted to do, like sort things or adding a running sum and then selecting some cells or clicking on the column header to indicate what I want, that will actually then write the DAX for you. So while you're interacting with that visual matrix, you also see the DAX being written. So that's then the answer to that question. That's how we envision that's going to work. So people can learn the DAX while they go by interacting with the visual matrix.
Perfect, lovely.
Yep.
If you copy a visual, will the visual calcs work in the copied visual?
Yes, it will work in the copied visual. It will the visual calc will go with it. So that will all work. And you can also individually copy paste visual calcs. Eventually, we'll take all the ingredients with us. So if you copy the profit visual calc to another visual that doesn't have sales amount and total product cost, we will bring over sales amount and total product cost in a hidden state to not break your visual display, to just make sure that the visual calc actually works. The alternative would be to not bring those ingredients with us, and that would mean that visual calc has to be in a broken state when it arrives in the new visual because sales amount and total product cost don't exist. So the choice that we're making is if you copy this profit visual calc, you paste it into a visual, we will bring over, eventually we'll bring over Sue's sales amount and total product cost to that new visual.
We've still got more. My lot are chatty
Yes.
lot. So as you can imagine, how do visual calcs and DAX fit in the long-term roadmap? I think you've answered that sort of pretty much, but yeah.
Yes, and I think there's an interesting question. Are visual calculations accessible in the PBIP file? Yes.
Yes. Oh, I missed
they
that one.
are
Yes.
in the reports.
Yes.
So you will
perfect.
be able to find those in the report. Yes. Absolutely.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice.
And then also the scanner API will very soon pick them up as well. So if you use the scanner API as an admin to discover all the things that's happening in your workspace, you will be able to see the visual calcs as well.
Oh, brilliant. Perfect.
Yes. Yep.
Were you influenced by Deneb?
No.
No. Okay.
I was not. I was influenced by a lot of things, but not by the NAP.
What are the use cases? What's best for visual calc?
Well, this is a great question, right? So measures are obviously best for reuse. Like if you want to do core calculations that you want to use over and over and over again in the same report, a measure is your best bet.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, there are many measures that are created today that are just one-offs for one or two visuals. In those cases, I would not create a measure. I would just create a visual calc. Also, there are problems with measures. A, they're complex to write. I already explained that. But the second problem is they don't perform. What that means is whenever a measure gets executed, there's two things that happen. It is executed separately from anything else. I'll explain what that means. The other thing is it will always go to the low level of data. So if you're doing a time intelligence function that says compare the total sales for this year versus same period last year, right? What this will do, you would assume it would take the aggregated data for the year and try to find the same aggregated level data for the previous year. That's not what this does. Even if that data has just been calculated and cached somewhere, This is not what that function will do. It will always go to the lowest level of data, start summing up individual sales records. And this is why sometimes measures don't perform, because they always go to the lowest level of data. They're not smart about aggregations. Visual calcs are smart about aggregations. So they will be better in that regard. Second, the other thing that I was talking about, they're always separate, which means if I do measure A is average of sales amount, and then measure B is average of sales amount times 2, you would maybe expect that measure B actually used the result from measure A because it was just calculated. No, 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 no. It will just do it on the fly again. Right? So it's not intelligent about, oh, what results do I already have lying around that I can base this calculation on? Oh, I just calculated the average of sales amount. I'm just going to take that number, do it times 2, be done. No, no, no. Measure B will do the whole shebang over again. So as an example, if you have a very simple visual now that shows, whoops, I'm showing some things as well. If I have a very simple visual now that has 4 measures on it, I am actually sending 5 queries to the data source. 1 to retrieve the aggregated level of data for the visual. Let's say we're doing sales amount and year. That's 1. We need that. And then 1 for each measure individually, which if you use a direct query source might result in 5 very big queries to the source. If you would switch those 4 measures to visual calculations, you would end up with just 1 query. Because the visual calculations will just use whatever is on the visual. So they won't go back to the source.
Nice. So I hadn't thought of the aggregation part.
And we have seen about 500% performance increase. So even if you don't care about simplicity of DAX, even if you don't want to do a moving average or a running sum, even if you don't want to refer to what came before, even if you just want to do a very simple switch statement, you can still use visual calcs and get benefits of performance.
I hadn't thought about that. Thank you. Yep. And the next things are about hierarchy, but I think that's the next bit of your presentation, isn't it?
Right, it is. We're a little bit behind schedule, but that's okay. I'll just skip forward a little bit. So I want to talk about these functions that we have, right? So we have low level and medium level and high level functions. So the low level functions are the window functions. You might be familiar with those. We released them in December 2022. You might have noticed that and went like, why are they doing this? I wrote a blog post for it and I was giving you some hints, but I was not allowed to show you what I was actually building. So why do these play in here? Well, low level functions, the window functions, are actually the building blocks of these functions that we've shown you today. Under the covers, these actually expand into window functions. So previous is just a shortcut to offset. Running sum is a shortcut to window, right? So you can write these window functions in visual calcs. They're not easy. And then you can use those for maximum flexibility. And then you can also use the medium and high level functions, which I'll show you, where you trade a little bit of the flexibility, but you get easier use because the window functions are not that easy as they should be, as I already wrote in that blog post in December 22. Yeah. The medium level functions are movement functions, previous, next, first, and last. We've seen some of these. There's an inspection function, is at level, that allows you to check whether or not you're on a subtotal or on a grand total. So if you wanted to do a custom total, you can use this to decide what happens on a custom total. Expand all, collapse and collapse all. These are the things that allow you to walk up and down a hierarchy. So Salil is asking what happens in the hierarchy. Well, you can now say, I wanted to do a average of children, which is average, let's say profit, average profit, expand something. Expand means walk down the hierarchy, add more detail. So I'm now doing something that is my children. I'm adding detail. Collapsing is the reverse, going up the hierarchy. If you wanted a percentage of parents, you write divide my profit by collapse something, right? Profit collapsed. So then I'm calculating the collapsed version of my profit, which is removing detail going one step up in the hierarchy. So Collapse is going upwards, expand is going downwards in the hierarchy. And then we also have a selection function that allows you to make a slice a little bit easier. I haven't shown you that, but it's called range. And then we have running sum and moving average. Those are the other two functions. I already showed you those.
Yeah,
so you can
brilliant.
refer to expand and collapse. And
It's
in
the
fact,
same as pivot tables, isn't it? You just expand and
yes,
collapse. Nice, simple.
yes.
Yeah.
So if I go to percentage of parent example that we built in, you will see there's a divide of my field name collapsing the field name,
Nice.
right? So we're just basically saying, take the profit, my current profit, and divide that by the profit, and then collapse on, and this is an axis called rows. What this will do is nothing, of course. Well, it will do something. This now just calculated the percentage of parent, which in this case is the percentage of grand total, because there's no hierarchies here, right?
Yeah.
This is how simple this percentage of parent is. It's just literally collapsing to remove detail. Expanding is going the reverse direction.
Lovely.
Make sense?
Yeah. Perfect. Cool. I love the way that it refers to Excel. It's the way it should be.
It's the way it should be. And we can talk about the last concept that I want to show real quick. And that's the concept of axes.
I'm not going to stop you at 7. You've got a few more minutes because it's you.
I got nine minutes still, so I'll be able to do this in 9 minutes. Don't worry.
Okay.
So think of axes as how the calculation traverses the visual matrix that is being executed on. And I've been using axes implicitly because axis by default is set to rows. So all these functions I've been working with actually has an axis parameter. So rows, we also show you the icon in the product. It is top to bottom across the rows. Think about when you see the word rows, we'll also show you the little icon, top to bottom across the rows, going like this. You can change it 90 degrees, and if you write columns, we go left to right across the columns. Right? So when you see rows, it's across the rows. When you see columns, it's across the columns. And then just because we can, we also added 2 more features of this, flavors of this, which is combinations of the 2. You can call them the typewriter or planter movement or the Z or N. I learned that in the last call that I did. Somebody called these Z or N movements, and they're actually right? Columns rows goes horizontally and then snakes down. And rows columns goes vertically and then snakes to the right. So as examples of this is easy. A first sales amount on rows. What this will do is we'll get for each column the sales amount in the first row in that column, right? So if you look closely, you'll see that there is a column for 2018, 2019, and 2020. Within each column, we're getting the sales amount for the first row. So these dashed lines will always refer to the solid line, right? And with the color coding, you can check that this makes sense. Very simple, very easy to understand. We turn it 90 degrees. Now we're getting for each column, retrieving the first sales amount from the first column. So now we're doing for each row, we're getting the first on columns. So that will mean instead of now getting the first, the sales amount for the first category, we're now getting the first sales amount, the sales amount for the first year all the time. So for 2020, we're now referring to the value within the same category for that first year. Now, yes, Christian, you're the one that called this Z and N, so I'm going to steal that from you. So the N movement, previous rows, columns. So this is where it gets your brain starts hurting a little bit. So what this means, previous sales amount, rows, columns, means for each cell, retrieve the previous sales amount from the row above it or from the last cell in the previous column. So let me explain. This cell is empty. Why? There's no row above me. There's no column to the left of me. So it's empty. This cell is not empty because there's a row above me. So I'm just getting that number. This cell, same thing. This cell, same thing. This cell would have been empty if I wrote previous on rows because there's no row above me. But since I wrote rows, columns, there is no row above me, but there is a column to the left of me. So I'm allowed to take the value from the previous column, the last cell. And that's then how this snakes over your visual matrix.
Oh, that's again very nice. Yes.
You can do a 90-degree turn. Columns rows, same thing. For each cell, retrieve the previous sales amount from the column to the left of it or from the row above it. Okay, this one empty. Why? There's no column to the left of me, there's no row above me. Nothing I can do. This one, not empty. There's a column to the left of me. Makes sense. This one, column to the left of me. Makes sense. This one would have been empty if I wrote previous on columns. But since I wrote previous columns rows, there's no column to the left of me, but there is a row above me, so I'm getting this value. And then, of course, this yellow one refers to the previous column. So this snakes like a Z across your visual matrix. These last two are not very commonly used. The value is limited. They are useful in some situations. For example, if you have years on columns and quarter number on rows, you can imagine you wanted to do a running sum or a moving average versus previous quarters, and you want to also make sure that it works across years. You can use this rows, columns, and columns, rows snaking to make sure that that actually works. So this is the other concept that you need to know. And then with that, I'm going to skip forward to the last slide that I have, which I invite you to ask me some more questions. This also shows a beautiful DAX meme that was created by the DAX meme person over on Twitter. They're also on Instagram these days. I want to invite you to try this feature. Try it. It is out there in public preview. You can just enable it in desktop. You can try it in the web. Try it out, test it out, see the limitations, read the list of documented limitations. If you have any questions, if you have any feedback, please let me know. aka.mesh/visual-calculations feedback. That's where I want to collect the feedback. And together we can make this feature the feature it should be.
Have you seen Mark Wilcox, who's London Business Analytics Group? I'm sure you've done it. He's doing on Friday, April the 26th. They're doing hands-on tutorials.
So I know. I was there last week presenting to them. So yes.
Well, he's following on from that. He's doing one better, and he's now doing what you said, and he is such a superb teacher. So he's now going to take people through, following on from your theory, how to do the practical. So I know I've put it in my diary because he's awesome, isn't he, Mark? So
no, absolutely.
So it's it's a London Business Analytics Group, and they're doing a hands-on tutorial. So a complete follow-on from this presentation from Jay. Everyone's gone quiet now. I tell you what, the columns row made my head hurt. The rows column, I'd completely, I'm like, yeah, I get that, understand that. Columns row, and I was like, oh, my brain's hurting now. I suppose we're not used to thinking in that way.
No, but once you get it, like that's also the beauty of this feature, is like the visual matrix is so visual. You can just look at it and go, oh yeah, yes, I see how this works, right? And today with measures, that's impossible. You can't see all that. You can't inspect that, right? So with the visual matrix, you can. So, and then of course we can do better. We can do interesting, because if you look at this visual matrix, it's very boring, right? Like there's nothing happening in here. There's no nice coloring. But imagine this like an Excel spreadsheet with all the formula. When you're editing a formula in Excel, you see this coloring, you see the highlights showing up. All that stuff is still coming, which will make this even easier, right? For you to understand what this thing does, well, you should be able to just inspect what is happening here.
I mean, it's just it was brilliant, so that you can see. I just love the fact that it's pulling in and using Excel language to make it easier. And I hadn't thought about the aggregation aspects, that you're not drilling down to the lowest level. So last question from Henrik. I guess it solves most wrong measured totals issue. He's being a bit, throwing it in there, isn't it?
I mean, he's not wrong, as in the measured totals are not wrong as well. And he's not wrong either, as in, yes, you get more flexibility to design whatever custom total you wanted. Is this as easy as it should be? No. But with these ingredients, we can then add the next layer, right? Now that we know the code that you have to write to use if is at level, do this, otherwise do something else, we could then create UI that allows you to just create this code without you having to write the code, right?
Yeah.
So imagine you walk up to this thing and say, you know what? Instead of this sales amount, I want to right click on this and say on the total, don't do measure total, but do visual total, or
Yeah.
do this average, right? And we could then just create this whole DAX for you without you even having to worry about it. So
Yeah.
that's the next step, or one of the next steps that we're planning to take. So I'm just showing you the building blocks today. So today, yes, it's possible to change this. Yes, it's possible to get different totals, to get custom totals as you want, but you have to write code. And yes, it should still be easier than that.
Okay.
But this
Does
is a
it
great step
still,
forward.
yeah, I've got my question. So
Mhm.
will this still work on thin reports? Because I can see this being absolutely perfect for thin reports where you've
It
got,
will work on
that's what
thin
I find,
reports.
you do your, and it's perfect for it, isn't it? You've got your
Yes.
golden model, you've got your measures, and then there's always little bits. And I find I have to go back to my main report, add them in, and publish it out. Whereas this is a really nice way just to quickly build in a very on the fly, quick report.
Yes. This
Yeah,
will absolutely work with thin reports.
yeah,
So yeah, this is where that's headed.
yeah,
So yeah, it's pretty cool
perfect.
stuff. We worked on it for
Yeah,
3 years for a reason.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, live connection. Sorry, I should have explained, Oliver. Yeah, I should have used different language. But yeah, it's perfect for that, isn't it? A huge, I love the fact we were chit-chatting all the way through it, Jay. It shows just the level of interest that people have in this method of being able to write DAX.
Right.
So lots of love in the chat for you as always. And next time you're doing a presentation, I want you first. You've been around all over the place.
We can make that happen soon. Don't
We
worry.
can make that
That's
happen.
you know.
Good. Yeah.
I'll let you know. You'll be the first to know whenever I have a new round of announcements around Visual Calcs. I'll
Yes.
It's a deal. We'll
Okay.
show that your location first.
I always ask for more, don't I?
I think I promised that to about 10 people by now. So
Yeah, I'm sure you probably have. I know your type.
yeah. Anyway, no, that
But
will be fine. And thanks again for setting this up, and thanks for taking the time out of your busy evenings or
oh
mornings or
no.
afternoons or whatever
Yeah.
to do this. Try it. Please try this
Yes.
feature
Yes.
because we need you to try this.
Yeah, I will
And
be
you need to tell
definitely.
us what is missing, tell us what's great, tell us what we need to build next. Because only if you try it now, we'll be able to improve it and ship it
Yeah.
as it needs to be.
Yeah, Andrew said he's got it open right now. I've got mine open playing with it as well. And thank you everyone for joining us and for making it such an interactive chatting session. It always is such a fun event to host. So thank you. We're not here next week. I have to work next week, but the week after we'll be back. So have a great couple of weeks. And I've got Vienna Marathon on Sunday. So keep your fingers crossed for me, everyone. And we will
Good
see you all
luck.
in 2 weeks. Yeah, thank you. Take care,
Good luck.
all. Thank you,
See ya.
Jay. Have a lovely
Bye
rest of the
bye.
day. All
Thanks.
right, take
Bye.
care. Bye, everyone. Bye. I have to remember to stop recording. Thank you, everyone, for coming along. Thank you, Christian. Thank you. Just have to remember to stop recording. Stop.